Hey y'all, welcome to Heritage Ways. Today I'm going to do something that I don't know of any southern country cook has ever done. I'm going to actually give you a written recipe with measurements for southern cornbread dressing. Why has nobody ever done this? Because southern cornbread dressing is something you make with your heart, with love, and you just feel it by stirring. You just feel it by holding the spoon. I don't have a written recipe. People have asked me. I get this question so much. It is time that I develop a written recipe for y'all. We're going to talk about the difference in stuffing and dressing. What in the world is the difference? There is a difference. And welcome to Heritage Ways. Welcome home. I'm Miss Katie, and this is Heritage Ways, where I educate and encourage homemakers. It has been many months this year since I have made a video, and there are a variety of reasons for that. Today, let's talk a little bit about the ingredients of southern cornbread dressing before I explain to you the difference in that and stuffing, y'all. It is that time of year when folks are asking me again, do you have a recipe? What is the difference in stuffing and dressing? Is there a difference? We're going to just touch on all that today, so I'm glad you're here. Obviously, the star of the show is a pan of cornbread. Missy made this cornbread for me earlier this morning. It's just been sitting out on the counter, and that's fine. I need it cold, and preferably, I need it kind of almost dried out. But this is not dried out, but it's definitely cold. And the next thing is going to be bread. Now I'm going to touch on this a little bit more when I talk about the differences in stuffing and dressing, but you want sliced bread. This is white bread from the store, and you need it to be stale. Let's go ahead right now and talk about the differences in stuffing and dressing, and that's going to explain the bread a little bit more. All right, there are very distinct differences between stuffing and dressing. You must understand that I feel qualified to talk about both of these because I call myself happily and proudly bi-regional. My daddy and his family are from the north, from Ohio, and my mama and her family are from Tennessee. So I am happily and thankfully part northern and part southern, although I talk and pretty much cook like I'm 100% southern. All right, people have asked me for years, and I've been wanting to make this video for years, the difference in stuffing and dressing. Now I have my grandmother's not really recipe but heritage of making southern cornbread dressing, and I actually have a literal recipe written down from my northern grandmother for her stuffing. Now, I like both. Now, what do I make? I make southern cornbread dressing every Thanksgiving because that is what I grew up eating. Now, when we would come to Ohio, where I currently live, lived here 4 years, and when we used to come to Ohio as kids, of course, Grandma Morgan would make stuffing, and that was very good too. I don't know of a rural southern cook who actually has a written recipe for dressing. It's just made by feeling, y'all. It's just made with love, just by feeling with the spoon, honestly. But today we're going to have a written recipe for you. Now, it starts with a pan of cornbread. You can't make southern cornbread dressing without a pan of cornbread. It is the main ingredient. We're going to talk about all the other ingredients, but the main ingredient is your cornbread. Also, you want to have dried out, you heard me right, white bread, or sometimes my southern grandmother would use biscuits also, and I've done that, white bread or biscuits. But here's the trick. She would leave, to get ready to make Thanksgiving dressing, she would leave the white bread sitting out on the counter for a couple days. You want it to be dried out. You know, not molded, not even toasted in a toaster, but dried out. All right, what we're going to make today, in this video, for demonstration purposes, I'm actually going to have to put the bread in the toaster. because I'm needing to make the dressing for tomorrow for the church dinner at the thing at church. So I'm going to have to put it in the toaster to dry it out, but even when I toast it, the inside is not going to be dried out. So ideally, you want the toast to be stale, dried out. All right, and same with the biscuits. If you're using some biscuits, you know, you can crumble those on the plate and leave them sitting out for a day at least. Stuffing. Let's talk about that. Stuffing is typically made from white bread or, you know, maybe even wheat bread. And that's the main ingredient. There is no cornbread in stuffing. You've got the white bread going on. You might have wheat bread, but just, you know, your yeast bread. And again, you want it dried out as well. Typically, that is not, it's never fresh. You don't want to use fresh because stuffing and dressing are both items, foods that are used. They use up remnants, if you will, ideally of different breads or cornbread or such. That's how they were, you know, kind of got started. Stuffing is it can be stuffed in a bird or not. My grandma used to stuff it in the bird, and that is fine. But I know people who make stuffing in the 9x13 pan. So stuffing has usually vegetables sometimes in it, and when I say that, I mean like it's gonna have onions and celery, and then it might have meat. It might have sausage. I've made a stuffing recipe that had sausage and apples, and actually it had a can of apple pie filling and some sausage. It was absolutely delicious. I love that. Hadn't made it in a while, actually in years, but you know, kind of counting the carbs and all that kind of thing, but it's a very good recipe. Also, a lot of people sometimes will put nuts in their stuffing, maybe you know, walnuts, chestnuts, that kind of thing, or dried fruit. So the stuff, you'll never find that kind of thing in Southern cornbread dressing, but in stuffing you will. And it's two different things, and they're both very good, but it's also regional. So before I go any further, I want to make sure, I want to tell you to please drop in the comments whether your region usually prepares stuffing or dressing, or neither one. You've never heard of either one. I'd love to hear. I want to read what you have to say about your stuffing or your dressing in the comments below. Those are the main differences. And then you would never put cornbread dressing in a turkey. It just can't. It's going to be soupy. You're going to see that. But the stuffing is not as soupy. So I hope that answers your question about what's the difference in dressing and stuffing. So I didn't set my bread out in time to be stale. I actually had to go buy this loaf of white bread because I don't typically have white bread at home. So I just wanted to show you that I did put these in the toaster. The recipe, as I just mentioned a minute ago, is going to be, you're going to find that link down in the description box of this video. It's going to be over at www.heritageways.com. And that's where I have a lot of printable recipes. My general store is there where you can buy my cookbooks and all the other things that we sell, handmade items and items for the homemaker and the homesteader. All right, the next thing you're going to want is celery. So this is 2 ribs of celery, stalks of celery, and I trimmed them. I got the strings off and the ends, and it ended up being a 1 1/4 cup. You're going to want 2 eggs. So I've washed our farm fresh eggs. They're ready to use. For today's video only, I never measure. I don't use a measuring spoon. But since I'm actually developing and perfecting this recipe for you today, I'm actually going to measure. So you're going to see me using measuring spoons today. I have sage. This would be called rubbed sage if you're buying it in the store. This is the sage from my garden. Oh, it smells so good. I encourage you to try to grow some herbs. Most herbs are super easy to grow. Sage, I planted it when we moved here 4 years ago, and I've done nothing ever since. It is a perennial, and it just keeps coming back bigger and better. I've got Redmond real salt because that's the only salt that I use. I have my black pepper meal. I have poultry seasoning, which is so yummy. Love it. And then you can use a small onion or medium onion if you like a lot of onion, and you can chop that. I actually don't have an onion today, but I'm going to use my dehydrated Vidalia onions. And now when you dehydrate or dehydrate and then powder your onions to get onion powder, it is going to be, it's all going to stick together. People have asked me, oh, Miss Katie, what in the world, what did I do wrong? You didn't do anything wrong. That is the sugar in the onions naturally, and it's just going to cause it to stick together, to harden, to become a clump. And you just have to get in there and, you know, kind of mash it up, and it'll be fine. It's because you're not using preservatives or anti-caking agents or any of that gunky stuff, and that's why it's going to clump up, and that's just fine. All right, you're also going to need a stick of butter, and I've already put a stick of butter in here, which is half of a cup, and I put it in my smaller cast iron, and I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to saute the 2 ribs or stalks of celery, which for me it ended up being about 1 1/4 cups. So if you don't care for celery, you can leave it out. If you like celery, you can always add more, but in my recipe, I'm going to say 1 1/4 cups. All right, I've got the celery kind of softening in the butter, kind of sauteing and softening. And yes, you do use the half a cup of butter, even if you're using celery and onion or just celery. So it's the same amount. Now, what you're going to do on this bread is you're really going to just tear it up. And again, ideally you want it to be stale, because if it's not stale, I can kind of tell that the inside of this, it's not stale, it's fresh, and it's kind of mashing together. But that's okay, it's going to work. So I'm just going to tear up into about, I don't know, crouton size pieces maybe. I don't use those bags of dressing, you know, like the Pepperidge Farm and stuff like that. I'm not telling you not to, but you really don't have to. All you need is some sliced bread. I add my own herbs. I've used those types of things before, the stovetop stuff, but like I could probably count on one hand the times in my life I've used it, because you really don't have to. And it tastes kind of fresher if you're, in my opinion, if you're just making it the way I do. But to each your own, you know. I'm just telling you how generations of my family have made this. I only use 6 slices of bread, so that's going to work just fine. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I've got this cornbread. Look, it's okay. That's what I want to do. But, you know, doesn't stick, comes right out of that pan. And you're simply going to crumble it. Now, this is kind of important. You are not going to crumble it to where it's just crumbs like cornmeal would be. You're going to have big chunks. Kind of, I'm going to say, I don't know, nickel or quarter size even. But you don't want to crumble it completely, because it's going to kind of break apart too when you stir it. I have a recipe for southern cornbread in my second cookbook, Supper's Ready, Let's Eat, but that cookbook is now out of print because we sold them all. Yay! So if you have that cookbook, you have 200 recipes that are not shared in my first cookbook. All right. Now this cornbread is a little dry, it seems like. Dry when it was made, so I don't think enough liquid was used, but that's okay. I appreciate the help, my family helping me make this. And that's really okay because of the fact we're going to be adding the liquid, so that's all right. In the morning, I'm going to come back just because it's late tonight and we've got church in the morning, but before church, I'm going to come back and I'm going to warm my broth and I'm going to add it to this, and I'm going to tell you what it's supposed to feel and look like. If you're a cook that goes by feeling and just kind of cooks with love, but also I'm going to have that written recipe for you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add the spices, and then I'm going to leave this just sitting out on the counter covered with a towel, and I'll come back in the morning and I'll finish the dressing. Normally I would just put my hand in here and get out what I need, but for demonstration's sake, I'm going to measure it. Now, this is my fresh sage, not fresh, my homegrown sage that's dried, and it's going to have bigger pieces than if you buy the rubbed sage at the store. But I am going to put, and I'm going to rub it between my hands because you do that with all herbs when you're using them. I'm actually going to use extra sage for Mr. Patient, but my recipe is going to be written for you of how much you should use, which is probably 1 tablespoon. But I'm actually using 2 tablespoons because we like sage. All right. And I've seen some recipes and they call it sage dressing, or sage sausage, because it has so much. Okay, now I'm going to put a tablespoon of poultry seasoning. And I'm going to put what amounts to probably a half a teaspoon of fresh cracked black pepper. And the last seasoning is the Vidalia onion powder. A teaspoon of that. Because when you dry something and powder it, it's more concentrated. All right, and then I'm just going to use this spatula here. And I'm going to just mix it. No, I'm not. I'm going to get in there. This bowl's too small. That's it. Okay, there's my seasonings. It's going to be delicious. And I'm actually trying not to break up those bigger clumps of cornbread. It's good to have different size clumps. Oh, y'all, this smells so good. Mercy me. Oh, this smells so good. That's it for tonight. I'm going to finish this up in the morning. All right, so you're just going to take your dried mixture and put it all here in a bigger bowl. You could have done this last night, but didn't. Bigger bowl, so you have room to work. I have 2 eggs. I'm just going to kind of beat them a little bit. I'll be putting those in a minute. Let me go ahead and add the butter and the celery. An onion, if that's what you're choosing to use. Get that stirred up in there. All right, now I'm actually going to just go ahead and add the eggs. And I'm not stirring that a lot. I'm just letting that sit there. And then I'm going to get my broth. All right, some notes about the broth. This is homemade broth. You can certainly use the canned or the boxed if you want to do that. And this broth is, since it's homemade, it is seasoned the way I want it, with salt and bay leaves and some pepper and other seasonings. I did heat it up, and you don't necessarily have to heat the broth. If you're using the canned or the boxed broth, then you don't really have to. I've many times not heated it, but I did this because this is homemade. It's really good quality, and it was gelatinous, which is a good thing. Meaning, if you're not familiar with that, meaning kind of like a gelatin consistency. And so to get it away from that gelatin consistency, I wanted to heat it just enough. And that way I would have more control on pouring it on here. So I'm going to add it in 1 cup increments. Also, another reason I don't really want it boiling is I don't want to cook those eggs necessarily. I don't want scrambled eggs. The eggs act as a binder in the dressing, is why I add it. I know there's some ladies who don't use the eggs, but I always have. All right, so far we have 3 scant cups. This will be 4 scant cups. See if I can make it. All right, now, and yet I don't want to destroy my larger clumps, but I know that I want it kind of, not really soupy, but in that neighborhood. You certainly don't want dry dressing. That liquid is starting to be absorbed by the crumbs. Today I used about 5 cups, nearly 5 cups of broth. My recipe's going to say between 4 and 5 because it depends on the dryness of your bread of how much you want to use. But you want it, I'm going to use the word soupy until I come up with a better word. But you do not want it to be dry at all. I do have a little bit of broth kind of along the edges that you can see. And the reason I'm spending so much time talking about this is because this is a crucial step. If you use too little broth, not enough broth, then it's just going to be undesirable. And you want it to be moist. You want the dressing to be moist. So that's what we're going to do right now, is to put it in the 9x13. I didn't grease this or anything. It's not going to stick too badly, if at all. You can butter it if you want, but I'm just going to pour it all in here. The broth is kind of visible. You can tell that, but this is absolutely fine. This is what you want. And knowing about the broth trick, that is your main thing to know about with making the Southern cornbread dressing. I'm going to put it in the oven at 350. Now, it's going to take, it could take up to 45 minutes. Could take 30 to 45 minutes. Honestly, it really depends, again, on the amount of broth and that kind of thing. The dryness of the bread, the amount of broth. So you're baking until it's just golden brown on top, and you can, test it with a knife if you want. It is coming out a little moist there, but I think that's going to be fine. You don't want to dry it out too completely. If you want to take the temp, if you want to temp it, so that's good, 172. So there you go. Southern cornbread dressing. It's going to be delicious. We're going to take this to church for our church Thanksgiving meal. Y'all, it was good to be with you today, and I'm going to drop my Thanksgiving playlist link down in the description box, so make sure you check all that information out. Happy Thanksgiving, and remember to count your blessings.